has become a this is spread at a very fast rate with new cases every day. Endemic is a disease that is always present throughout a specific region or population, but the prevalence of the disease remains fairly stable and predictable over time. So looking at COVID, we're kind of getting to that point where we're transitioning into an endemic stage versus the pandemic stage. It's becoming more predictable, stable as the case rates decrease throughout the whole. So my first thing that I have here, you can draw some parallels to the Great Influenza of 1918. So this was kind of fun to look into because there is a lot of like parallels throughout the two of them. So it estimated 500 million people became infected, which is a third of the world's population. 50 million deaths, but it was mostly abated by 1920, which is about 2 years after it began. So at COVID, kind of similar timeline right there. We're at that about the mark. The virus also evolved over time to become less deadly, and as new strains of COVID, you may find similarities there because the viruses really don't necessarily want to kill; they just want to spread. So how they evolve becomes based upon how can I effectively people may eventually lead to it becoming less deadly. And looking at, so this comes right from the CDC, if you look in. So before a vaccine for the flu was developed, the control efforts included isolation, quarantine, good personal hygiene, use of disinfectants, and limitations of public gatherings. So
Casey, I just want to stop you a minute. We're getting a real breakup when you're speaking. Is anybody else getting that breakup on theirs?
Yeah, I am too.
Okay. So double check the connection cord to the microphone, and you might want to get closer. If you're sitting at the computer, we can't see you, Casey.
Can you see me if I sit over here?
Yes, and the sound is much better.
All right. So everything that I was just talking about is basically this stuff on the page here. So just going through that in the connections to the Great Influenza of 1918 to COVID as it is now. Do you want me to go over this slide again, or is everybody good?
And I didn't even hear, did you get a chance to introduce yourself? And
yeah, I can go back. I don't think I did, actually.
I know you have a little one with you.
Yeah, he's getting over with dad now, though. So
That's Kent. So everybody knows who that is.
Yeah, he's pretty cute. He's my sidekick all the time. So my name is Casey. I am a medical assistant with Helen DeVos in the outpatient center. My fiance Ben, who's sitting in the back, is also a firefighter EMT. So we're both fairly involved in the medical communities. This was a really fun presentation for me to put together. A lot of that goes into the Great Influenza connections that I found. And then also a little bit later, we'll get into some mental health stuff, which has always been kind of a passion of mine. I've worked with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention for about 5 years now. So yeah, that's who I am. And this is what we're doing. Pandemic to endemic. And then, yeah, everyone get a chance to read this slide now? So with COVID, there have been a lot of mental health challenges. Overall, you've seen increased stress, anxiety, and fear. increased feelings of sadness and loneliness because of the quarantine and isolation. And anyone who before COVID became a pandemic, any mental health condition that pre-existed was at risk of worsening with this. So those are kind of things that have affected a great population, a great portion of the population. Even suicide risks or suicide numbers have increased with the pandemic over the last 2 years. Go back. So just some ideas for some mental health care, taking care of your body. So some examples of that are just getting enough sleep, participating in regular physical activity, eating healthy, taking care of your mind is the next step on our list. Keep a regular routine. And that was definitely harder at the beginning when everything was shut down and you were just sitting in your home and, you ate a lot because you were there and you had the fridge open and you didn't necessarily go to bed at normal hours because you were just in the home. And so now it's that things are getting back open. It's a little easier to focus on that, but keeping a regular routine of a consistent bedtime, wake time, those are all good things that help take care of your mind. This one's my favorite, limit exposure to news media. That really plays into the fear factor. If you're watching the numbers every day and all of that can definitely add into your fear and anxiety of what's going to happen. So then the last one on there is use your moral compass or spiritual life for support. Connecting with others. So even though we've had a lot of isolation feelings because you can't go out into the public, we have an incredible number of ways to connect with people: email, texting, phones, video chats, to stay connected with those people. And then next is avoid stigma and discrimination, get the facts. And then for me, just a personal note into this, like self-care is very personal. Make sure your self-care is what you need and not what others consider self-care. Because I know plenty of people that are like, I'm gonna sit down and color a very intricate piece of art for 5 hours and that's going to be my self-care. If you sat me down with a very intricate piece of art for 5 years, my anxiety would skyrocket. It would not help me at all. But my self-care is that I have horses. And so you send me to the barn for 5 hours and I'm going to come back totally refreshed. So just self-care has to be what helps you and not what somebody else would consider self-care. And then just a little options for people if you're not aware of these resources to get help. So the first step in reaching out for help is recognizing what's typical and what's not. So despite your best efforts, you're taking care of your body, you're taking care of your mind as best you can. If you're still feeling sad, angry, hopeless, anxious, or afraid, it might be time to reach out for some help. So options for getting help can just include reaching out to a friend or a loved one, reaching out to a minister or spiritual leader. I shouldn't say most, but a lot of places have employee assistant programs. So you can always try to find out if that's available to you with your work and reach out to them. Your primary care physician or a mental health professional can help you connect to resources in your local area. There is a national suicide prevention line, so I have that up there. And that crisis text line is missing an S. Sorry about that. But the text line, you just text talk to 741-741 and somebody will text back on that crisis line.
Casey?
Yes.
Sharon here. You probably don't know a number of the people on here, but I know there's several social workers who may be some of those therapists that are getting people contacting them for that very help you're talking about.
Yeah, and if any of you have input or would like to discuss, feel free to jump in here. No, okay. So this is a quote to consider. COVID-19, the conversation centerpiece we have been talking about for the past 2 years. Ooh, I can't read it. Which appears to be, as society states, the new norm. COVID started as an issue with a magnitude of consequence for those who failed to take precautions. Our current position in precautions appear that several of us have become complacent in the protection department, considering we hardly wear masks, keep our distance, or even wash our hands the same amount or of times or for the same length of time we did 2 years ago. Emergency services see a lot of variable symptoms associated with this virus, some minuscule, some detrimental to not only our people, but to their families. So how can we close the pandemic gates, plant our feet in the endemic soil? To be completely honest, nobody knows it. However, prevention is the #1 key. Prevention in any setting or occupation begins by practicing proper hand washing. Look back to the Black Plague, also known as Jewish death. In Europe in the late 1340s, Jews were blamed for the plague because fewer Jews were catching the infection and less were dying from it compared to other religious or ethnic populations. So what did the Jews do that was different from others? They washed their hands a lot. They washed their hands before a meal, during a meal, depending on the day of the week, after a meal, before and after caring for livestock, and before and after handling surfaces commonly used in religious practices. Simply by washing their hands, they avoided a considerable amount of needless loss. We can say that this is the way they prevented the infection progression based on the fact that they did not have the personal protection equipment, technology, antiseptics, or infection detection measures we have today. I strongly believe that if we follow similar practices of proper hand hygiene, we can make an impact on this seemingly endless medical crisis. Will it ever completely go away? Probably not, but we can surely limit it. Aside from avoiding surface to surface or person to person contamination, we need to focus on mental health just as much. Since the pandemic started, not only nationally, but internationally, suicide rates have drastically increased. Yes, those rates are declining slowly. Mental health experts relate this decline to the decrease in ordinance imposed on social restrictions, but there was a noticeable spike. Additionally, more individuals of all walks of life have been formally diagnosed with a mental health condition compared to pre-pandemic statistics. We as a society need to remember that we are all going through this historical moment together. We see the same news, statistics, viral evolvement, information. We see the same thing. People are scared or they have accepted this malevolent event. Disregarding their positional outlook or perspective on this pandemic, we need to remember to be kind and caring for one another, despite any opposing viewpoints or as a society is influencing political involvement. Some people are more worried or submerged in stress than others. Therefore, a simple hip pocket remark could be what pushes someone beyond their capabilities and drive them to an unstable mental health crisis. In conclusion, I strongly believe we could make a drastic impact on the situation and the attitude associated with simply by washing our hands, practicing good hygiene, abiding by our current care plans we have with our primary care provider, and by simply spreading smiles, not fear. And that is a quote from Benjamin Smith, firefighter EMT, who is here. Do you want to add anything? Any questions?
I noticed today that on the news, they said there was quite an uptick in hepatitis in kids that's happening right now. And it sounds like a very similar situation to prevent it. as for the COVID, because they kept saying about really emphasizing about hand washing.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at both the Jewish plague that Ben mentioned in his quote and the 1918 flu pandemic, the thing that ended up like really encouraging it to go into that endemic status was the good hygiene and washing everything and washing your hands. In the Black Plague, it was a time before we even had Lysol wipes. So that good hand hygiene is really what you can track it down to, why they didn't have as much infection. So if it's the case in whatever year that was, 1300, 1340, something like that. If that's the case in 1340, in 2022, I'm pretty sure we can wash our hands, help each other out. But so just in conclusion, it would appear that we are approaching that endemic status with COVID, meaning that it is becoming more predictable and manageable. This virus has taken a toll on society as a whole in both a physical and mental status. There are resources available for anyone who may be struggling. Hand hygiene and how we transition out of the pandemic mindset is a very personal decision. And you should always do what's best for you and your family. And that's all I have.
What do you see about the difference in moving from the pandemic into the endemic portion where we're living with this? I get about the hand washing, I mean, that's just good hygiene and everything, but the psychological impact of how do we do things now? What kind of world are we living in? Do we have parties? Do we go to graduation and sit in a gymnasium with tons of people? How do we socialize families?
Yeah. For me, I see a lot of stuff being hybrid options since we've discovered all of this technology. I know there are a lot of businesses that will not be going back to in-person work because they sent everybody home with computers and technology, and it's cheaper than having the lights on in a big building and everybody in the big building. So I know there are several businesses that won't, like office spaces in particular, that won't be going back to in-person, except for maybe once a month they might have a meeting for everybody or something like that. But a lot of those can even be done through Zoom or Teams or different media to connect people on a greater scale. So that's a thing. As far as like birthday parties and stuff, that I think it comes down to a personal choice and a family choice. I think as a society, things are going towards that, masks aren't mandated anymore, and you don't necessarily have to show your vaccine card as much, to go to things. So as a society, I think we're reaching that endemic level where things are just going to be more open. But that doesn't mean that COVID it goes away. It just means that it's predictable, right? So we've watched it for 2 years, and now we know, okay, when fall hits and all the activities go from outdoor activities to indoor activities, you're going to see a spike. When, you have more of the graduations in the spring and stuff that are inside, you're going to see a spike in cases. But we have 2 years of research to show us when those spikes are going to be. Those mandates may come back into place, but it doesn't mean that it goes away. But it's going into that definition of endemic status as a society. And then, with family gatherings, with those type of things, that's going to be a more personal decision. Do I go to this? And you have to factor in your own risk factors. For me, when I was pregnant, I didn't want to go to anything. I didn't hardly want to go into the grocery store because I was so worried about making sure that I was safe for my baby. And now he's 9 months old. And so now I put him in the grocery cart and let him touch the things because I want him to start building that immunity. I'm a little less cautious, still practicing good hygiene with him and all of that, but I'm going to be less cautious in letting his immune system do its job. So I think that aspect stays a personal choice.
I would love to hear what everybody's biggest challenge is. I mean, mine right now is my daughter's coming to visit from New Zealand, and she knows that if she catches COVID while she's here, she can't get back into the country, back into New Zealand where she's living. And I think all of us have different challenges depending on what's going on. So I would love to hear some people share what they're facing.
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm glad that the state decided to go to weekly as opposed to reporting statistics 2 or 3 times a week. It's less stressful to hear.
What do those statistics do for you, Ken? What impact do they have on you?
When they're up high, they kind of make me feel stressed. But I think I feel less stressed hearing them once a week than I do 2 or 3 times a week. So that's my thought. I don't know, if anybody else feels, the same way or it doesn't make a difference, but I was glad when they decided in the past month to change how they reported statistics out.
Casey, there's a comment in chat.
Yep, I was just gonna read the chat here. So Pamela Mackey commented, hi, I want to keep wearing my mask and find stress that almost no one around me wears one in public.
That's a good one. Social pressure. I know a couple of weeks ago, I went to a funeral and it was going to be really close quarters. I was feeling uncomfortable and I had my mask with me. And I found myself not being really comfortable putting it on until I saw there were a couple other people wearing a mask. It's just a weird psychological thing about feeling like a pariah in a group of people.
Well, I have a family wedding on Memorial Day weekend out east, which I am not going because I'm just concerned with all the hoops you have to go through, first of all, to travel. And then once you get there, I'm still concerned about, even if we're following COVID protocols, which are going to potentially catching COVID. So as much as I want to be there in attendance, I am not going.
Michelle's out. You're out in California, right, Michelle?
Well, we're doing quite a bit of traveling. I was going to chime in.
Oh.
We're doing quite a bit of traveling. And for me, that is an issue because some of the travel mandates for masks have been lifted. And I am an avid mask wearer, and I really don't care if people find that difficult. I go into the store, as many of you were talking about, I go into the store and people aren't wearing masks and I feel uncomfortable. I wear mine. I feel uncomfortable that other people aren't. I find it interesting today as we're talking about this from the perspective, Casey, thank you, first of all, by the way, for the definitions, because going from a pandemic to an endemic is more of a psychological move than it is an actual scientific move. We are still inundated with virus changes and variants that are coming up. So to say that we have moved away is more a hopeful part of our society. We don't want to wear masks anymore. We don't want to have a different normal. We want to go back to the way things were. And doing that, from my perspective, I want to speak for myself, from my perspective, is unhealthy. We really need to take a look at continuing our vigilance in, as you mentioned, Casey, with our hand washing, wearing of our masks, keeping our distance from individuals, testing. But our society and our culture is choosing not to do that. They're choosing to say, well, we're almost done with this. We don't have to worry about it. And oops, I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm not on video. Okay. So what my concerns are, and I'm going back to my original point, Sharon, we travel quite a bit, and I wear our masks. We wear our masks when we're on a plane, on a train, when we're going anywhere, and feel a little bit uncomfortable if we have to sit next to someone who's not wearing a mask, or if someone is sitting in the cabin coughing. You know, these are things that are always going to feel uncomfortable until there is no COVID. And that day is not going to come, certainly not in our lifetime, because COVID's going to be like the flu. You know, we're going to have different variants every year, and they'll become less and less difficult. But still, it is, in my estimation and my way of thinking, it is still in the pandemic stage. And the idea that it's moving towards an endemic because it's become a little bit more predictable is allowing us to be less vigilant. And that, to me, is very uncomfortable. I think that part of that is caused too by the CDC, WHO, Fauci, everybody saying something different when something happens. You know, if we don't get consistent information, then we don't have consistent vigilance. So.
I'm curious how people are handling, there's like two opposite situations. One is one-on-one. And, you know, for anybody that's a therapist or does counseling and they're sitting in a room one-on-one, if, you know, you feel that mask wearing is important there. And then, of course, the other ones when we go into stores and there's a lot of people around us. Even workmen in the house. Work people in the house, could be women coming in.
I have an issue with all of the people. I think there's some, not just mental health issues, but this combatedness between people that believe that their freedom is being taken away if they're asked to wear a mask. And yet I don't understand why those of us that choose to wear a mask can't say, this is my freedom to choose to wear a mask. So that's very frustrating for me to feel like we can't understand each other, that we both have the freedom to wear or not wear a mask.
Years ago, when I was in Japan, the custom in Japan is if you are sick to wear a mask. So if you have a cold or a flu, it was very common to see people getting on the subway, walking down the street with mask on. But over here, I'm just checking my own brain. Like sometimes a mask has a signal that you don't trust the other person. It doesn't make any sense, but I just find that visceral reaction. Almost seems, if it's a friend of mine, somebody that I know, there's a part of me that feels like it's being rude. Yet we know that getting COVID has nothing to do with anybody's integrity or, you know, practices. It's just something that you catch. Does anybody else go through that? It sounds like Kent does.
Well, look at all the government officials who go through rigorous testing and how many of them in the White House weekly or daily come up being positive for COVID, you know, like the vice president and, you know, a whole host of others recently who all have tested positive for COVID. and, you know, everything that they have to go through, you know, to get into the White House and all that stuff. So it seems like no matter what you do, you know, you can't prevent yourself from potentially catching COVID.
Well, for the
Yeah,
wearing of the mask things, Sharon, that you brought up, I find that the people that I am friends with and that I know well are of like mind with me. And that is that we have chosen, many of the people that I associate with, and that we have chosen, if we're going to see each other. I still don't eat in restaurants, by the way. So if we're going to see each other, we'll see each other outside, and that, you know, we're just getting back into the warm weather. So, you know, I just had a text from a good friend of mine who said, I can barely wait until we can go for a walk again. I have another good friend who, when I go to visit, we sit out on her back porch so that we aren't wearing masks. You know, and that's in the Michigan area. In California, of course, weather's a little bit warmer and we can hang out in each other's backyards, which is kind of nice. But the idea of that someone, you know, that we're talking about this stigma of you know, people who wear masks versus the people who don't wear masks. Well, that's sad. It's very sad. But I guess you have to step into your own idea of who you are and who you want to be. Are you comfortable wearing a mask? I know I am. If I have a workman come to my residence, plumber or someone to work on the furnace or whatever, I request that they wear a mask when they come in. I also ask them if they've been vaccinated. I don't have a problem with asking people, you know, it's their own decision whether or not they are vaccinated. That's a personal decision. I don't think it's a wise one, but it's, you know, a personal decision. But I have the right to say, this is my home and I'm going to protect my home and my people, you know, so I can ask. And I had a workman come to my door and he didn't have his mask on. And I said, your company said you would be wearing it. And he said, oh, my bad, I left it in the car. Well, please go and get it, or I have one that you can wear. So it's too bad that we have conflict between, you know, camps, if you will, of mask wearers and non-mask wearers, but that's who we are. That's, you know, that's part of our, you know, if you will, American philosophy, that we can make up our own minds about what we want to do, irregardless of how it's affecting other people. And that's too bad.
I see it within families.
Mhm.
I find that the most difficult when you have a family gathering and you have some, people that are maybe in high risk situations. They see a lot of people and that they're coming together. And again, thank goodness warm weather is here. Picnics feel a little safer than Thanksgiving dinner at an indoor table. But yeah, really tough with families.
Yeah, it is. Someone else mentioned they weren't going to a family wedding because of their own personal concerns. And I know that John and I attended a wedding about 2 months ago. One of our nieces was married, and there were probably 250 people at this wedding, and there were only 4 of us wearing masks. And the people that weren't wearing masks, and these are our relatives, made fun of us. Oh, you're still wearing a mask? Yep, I am. And I'm very comfortable with it. And we're not staying for the dinner because we made that choice. We're going to wear a mask during the ceremony, say hi to everyone. We're not going to stay for the dinner. Choices. Everyone has choices, and that, yes. So
I think this, like the whole debate about whether you're gonna wear a mask or not, like directly goes back to a substantial impact on people's mental health. Like just as a date back topic, like we're all sitting here talking about our viewpoints on it and the preventative actions that we take to either enforce it or say, hey, you know, I don't want you wearing a mask around me, you know, whatever your oppositional standpoint is. And that causes people a lot of stress. And so we take that stress and anger out on people. And realistically, whether or not you're gonna wear a mask, the whole mask and social isolation and quarantine lockdown mandations there was a study that was done that showed the reason that a lot of people opposed these entire, or not the entire situation, but most of the restrictions that were implemented was simply because it was put into a political aspect. If it was not put into that political aspect and people were capable of maintaining that ability to make that personal choice, then there may not have been such an oppositional view on it.
Mhm.
So it simply comes down to, if you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask, it is simply a preventative piece of material, right? So it doesn't necessarily matter what you're coming in contact with, unless you're in a high class hazmat suit, you're not 100% protected. Realistically, if you get the influenza vaccine, you are still at risk for contracting influenza, whether it's A, B, C, or D. Same thing with COVID. If you have your vaccine, great. That's helping your body, and that is lowering your probability of becoming contagious with this virus. If you're wearing a mask, great. It's still, there's that slight percentage that you can still contract this virus. On top of that, COVID is a droplet virus, which means if you're wearing a mask and you don't have, let's say, protective eyewear, you can contract this virus through your eyes, simply by somebody talking. When we talk, we salivate, and that sprays, it mixes. When we sneeze, when we cough, it can get into their eyes and they have it. Whether or not they're going to become symptomatic is up to their immune system. And as far as the whole political aspect of this, I guarantee that in the beginning of the pandemic, we all saw, 50,000 people have COVID, 49,000 people died from it. Okay. And that freaked everybody out. That caused so many issues, not only within societies, but with mental health aspects. But I worked on a COVID unit for that first year summer. And I had the ability and the privilege of working with a vast majority of patients ranging of ages. I had patients in their 20s. I had patients in their 80s. I had patients who had the most complex medical history that were completely asymptomatic. I had patients who had no medical history whatsoever and died. Whether or not it was from COVID or not, we don't necessarily know that. So there's this huge fear focused around this, and I feel like it's putting a barrier. I feel like it's putting a barrier onto people's full in-depth understanding and the ability to process the current state that we're in, because there is such a political influence. There is a massive social influence. It's all we hear about. So when you hear about it, your oppositional viewpoint, or whatever side of the fence that you're on, your opinion is growing. And then when you're stressed out, you're going to take that out on other people when they don't agree with you. And that's one of the big social complications that we're having.
You bring up two excellent points, and one has to do with the information being of a political nature. We have so many different studies being done right now, and if you try to keep abreast of all of the information, you find conflict within it quite a bit, and that causes a lot of stress. The other issue is mental health issue. I think is one that we really need to address even more. I think, Casey, you put up some literature at the beginning with one of the slides with some ways of dealing with that. But I think that's, as a spiritual community, I think that's one of the issues we probably need to talk with in depth. What support are we offering to our congregants as far as how to get information to them mental health wise? Everyone, and that's a broad use of everyone, but we have all been affected from in a mental health arena here. with the difficulties of the stress, with the anxiety. And if you watch the news, you know, even only once a day, the top story is about COVID. And to have that in our faces on a regular basis is uncomfortable and stressful. So I guess that's the question I want to throw out as a spiritual community. What types of things, what outreach can we do as a spiritual community to our congregants to help them through the stress and anxiety that is ongoing with this?
That's the correct question.
Michelle, it reminds me that there's been a lot of grief over the last 2 years that we haven't been able to process.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've been asking this question. I know even with outside of Unity, there's just friends that are going through this, or people that are therapists, that where does the therapist go? We got a request last night for a support group for therapists and spiritual leaders to have a place to come and get their support. You know, the old keeping your cup full to be able to help others. But it just seems almost overwhelming. As I said, my daughter's coming to visit. I haven't seen her for 3 years because of the pandemic. And during the time she was in New Zealand, her father died and her nephew died.
Mm.
And she was not able to be with family. So yeah, I'm looking for that outlet to handle this grief that kind of has cobwebs on it, but darn it, we're still carrying it. Or even the losses of graduations and weddings that were postponed and funerals that couldn't be held because of quarantine. I don't know how to unpack all that.
And the fact that you said you had a funeral that you attended the other day, which you weren't able to do, like you mentioned, you know, during,
Quarantine.
COVID, you know, that funeral homes were stacked up, you know, and then they had to revise, you know, the funeral practices and customs during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
People couldn't even attend, you know, in-person funerals, or it might have been family only.
I don't know. Anybody have any ideas out there? There's Pam, Eliza, Danielle.
Well, you know, I'll speak up.
Yeah.
My whole focus in this is the name of our spiritual community, right? Like unity. And it's not just COVID that's bringing up the divisiveness, although it certainly has been front and center for a while there. And I don't choose to wear a mask at this point because for most of the quarantine period, I wore a mask minimum 6 hours a day, most days closer to 8 to 10. And I also had people like try to establish fear in me from wearing the mask. Like, you shouldn't be doing that, and it's going to cause all these problems down the road because I'm like, my mom's a doctor. I'm pretty sure that there's medical staff that have worn masks for 8 hours a day for the length of their career and not, but somehow we've got to get past that. Like that particular day, I was able to laugh at the number of things that happened that day that triggered me into a sense of you're wrong, right? That's not where I want to live. I don't want to live in judgment of myself. I don't want to live in judgment of others. I want to be able to find that place where we can communicate in that sense of unity. And I do feel like that all of the divisiveness that's coming up, you know, the certainly police brutality and racism, and now sexism is on the forefront. It's just one emotional, divisive topic after another that's being put in front of us. And my heart towards that is that they're coming up to be healed. They're coming up for us to be able to not put them in the dark anymore, not pretend like they're not happening. And I feel the same way about superbugs. Like I didn't hear anybody bring it up, but at the very beginning of the pandemic, when I was listening to different sources of information, there were several scientists saying, yes, this is going to be an issue. Yes, we're going to lose people. Yes, we're going to have to go through a learning curve, but this is not the superbug we're expecting. So I do think it's going to continue to be an issue, even if COVID goes into endemic. Who's to say there's not another virus coming down the road that we're going to have to deal with, and we're going to deal with it however we personally can deal with it. But my heart for it is that we do have tolerance and support and belief in and love for one another. And that comes from our spiritual essence. So if we can get to that somehow, then we can have an easier go of it. Yes, we've lost people. Yes, there's been an amazing amount of grief, and we've lost activities and we've lost gatherings. And, you know, so there's been a huge amount of loss. What has that opened up? Has it opened up our appreciation for being able to gather? Has it opened up our appreciation for how much we are social creatures and we need one another? And we need to be there for one another, no matter what we're facing. I don't know how to put that into a program to make it an outreach, but I know that's my hope and my heart is to heal and to tap into that unified field where we're humanity and we're not just human beings and ego clashers.
I think Danielle, you put that very, very well, and as you always do. And I think an answer that comes from that is dialogue. Just, you know, what we're doing today, but hopefully on a broader range, hopefully on a larger range, to dialogue with each other, to say what differences we have in the ideas and the things that we're facing, and how do we find, you know, a common place with that, as you say, unity, and with each other, even though we may have differing opinions. How do we find a unified place to be together? And the only way we can do that is through dialoguing with each other. We've had enough time where we've been separated from each other. It's time to spend that time dialoguing, talking about what we've experienced and how to be more accepting and how to be more together if we can. And that's a job. That's a job for all of us.
And I do think that the sort of forcing of technology and having to learn Zoom and having to learn to connect other ways has been a huge benefit of this. Like I have friends in different countries now that I would have never necessarily met, right? It's because I reached out through social media, through electronic media, whatever you want to call it, and met these people that do have this same sense of, and so like I'm a member of the Presence Posse now that has people from Ireland and Norway and Alaska and Texas and Michigan all speaking on that same topic of unity, of presence, of the present moment, of the appreciation of the positive things that we can focus on and that we can bring to this present moment and the next present moment. And right. So I do think that there are things to be gained from it. And I do think that the losses have to be processed and not bypassed. So we do have a role in that somehow. And yeah, courageous conversations is certainly a good step towards that. And I'm glad we were able to have it because we've missed it for a couple of years now.
Does anyone miss having the physical presence of being social in a group like we used to be? Thinking when it was like carefree and you just didn't have these questions, you know, kind of, if you are out in a group and you take that risk, is your schedule open enough that you can be kind of isolated for the next week to make sure that you didn't pick something up that are symptomatic? I still have difficulty with spontaneous hugs, whether I'm comfortable or not with them, depending on what I got coming up the next week, that I want to really make sure I'm safe. And it still feels like the etiquette isn't really clear for me in a social situation of an unknown, even with friends. Like, what is the proper way, what acceptable? Like, it just seems like such a shifting sand of, and I guess I probably feel this because of the responsibility that the board, you know, working with the board here at Unity has had with deciding if we're meeting in person. We are really fortunate in that we have an air exchange system, that we have a lot of space. It's easy to social distance, but to have to make those decisions that if you're wrong could cost somebody their life is not a light thing to carry around for a couple years. And that's true whether it's a group or whether you're doing one-on-one work with people, or going out to do, I mean, the volunteer work. Most of the organizations with volunteers right now are having a great difficulty filling a lot of the slots. People either aren't quite comfortable yet, or they become more homebodies than before as far as going out. Meals on Wheels is one. I know they were having difficulty getting drivers. I think they arranged a lot of that, they leave it outside, but sometimes they're serving people who can't get to the door and carry it in. So the domino effect of this, yeah, it's just huge.
Yeah, I feel like we tend to be a very huggy congregation. And even before the pandemic, we had to start telling our congregants to ask people if they wanted to be hugged before hugging them. And I think that some of it is just vocalize it. Like, I feel like I would like to hug you. Are you comfortable with that? Or I would love to hug you, but I'm not comfortable with that because I have these other commitments that I need to maintain my health for. And I just feel unsure of that in the current biological situation, or whatever, however you're gonna phrase it. And yeah, it would be my go-to just to, like, yeah, just hug people when I feel like hugging people, but I probably shouldn't.
And I feel like that would also go back to, you know, just personal conflict for just who we are as humans. Like, we psychologically have a drive for social interaction and physical contact. Like, there's no second guessing that. And at no point in any of our lives could we imagine having that drive for social interaction and physical contact being obstructed by a pandemic. And so it puts us into a very conflicting space of we have a psychological drive to obtain this need, but we have now incredible boundaries in our way as far as we don't want to offend somebody. We're afraid of, as I was saying earlier, their oppositional view. We don't want to overstep those boundaries. And that's another big issue, especially going back to mental health, which has been a major cause for increase in depression and progressive depression disorder diagnoses in various populations, because they're unable to get that interaction.
I'm just curious, how do you let your family and others interact with your newborn?
That's a very good question. So
And that's a whole new thing, when people are having babies or during COVID and now. So I'm just curious, like, what impact has that had on, your interactions, your family's interactions, friends' interactions with your newborn?
I wouldn't say that we walk around with our baby in a bubble. However, we are cautious as far like we didn't go to one of the rodeos that Casey has gone to forever last year simply because we didn't want that exposure.
Yeah.
And it's also looking at it from a various aspect. I work for a fire department and an ambulance service. The amount of because you want mommy, now like that go. The amount of people that I come in contact with, not even just COVID patients, like confirmed COVID positive patients. I'm coming in contact with hepatitis, meningitis, croup, MRSA, things that nobody wants to have. And the amount of times I have bathed myself in bleach wipes to prevent bringing that home is insane. So it's one of those things where.
And it was different. Like for me, while I was pregnant, I didn't do anything. I didn't go to my family gatherings. I didn't go anywhere except to work and home. And that's about it. And when he was a young newborn, because of the restrictions on the hospital, for the first week, 2 weeks of his life, he met me and my parents. So that was already in place with the hospital. You could only have 2 visitors per day. No, it was per day because
Yeah.
yeah. So it was limited from the hospital anyway. And then we didn't have anybody. And then it was initially, as soon as people walked through the door, it was like, can you go wash your hands? Which maybe is normal for having a newborn. I don't know. I've only had a COVID newborn. So but it was wash your hands. I had people, some of my friends that I was most comfortable with coming into the house, even asked me if they wanted me to wear a mask or wanted me to have them wear a mask when they met him. They were that respectful of coming in to meeting him. And those were the people that got to meet him when he was a newborn. Now he's a little older. We're a little more relaxed on that. But we still don't do
large obnoxious gatherings.
Yeah.
Because if we were to completely isolate him, that drastically decreases his probability of catching COVID, but it also
means that he could.
It makes him susceptible to severe reaction to other infections because he wouldn't have a developed immune system. So it's definitely, I'm going to call that a pandemic catch-22.
Yeah. But my parents also watch him. He doesn't go to a daycare. He doesn't do that.
Yeah. Are we talking about grandma?
Yes. And he loves it. Don't let him fool you. He loves it. He loves his grandma. And his grandpa. His grandpa gives him cookies. So he doesn't have that aspect of it. And I do a lot of like when I do grocery shopping, I do the pickup orders. I don't take him into like even really a lot of grocery stores. So the social settings that he gets is like one-on-one with another kid or with family, and that's about it.
And I think early on, one of the saving graces for Casey being a very social person was to be able to come to church and bring her baby to church because the board had made the decision to mandate the mask, and people were not hugging, and she knew that people weren't going to take or touch her newborn.
Yeah.
So she was able to have that support without being in fear for her child's health.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's gonna talk all at once.
Casey, do you want to go around and just do, I don't know, if you've had anything else planned for this, or maybe a around the room check-in or check out about this, or any, even a possible one thing we could do to help things going forward as we're all going through this tremendous life transition?
Yeah, we can do a checkout. I didn't have anything more. I'm really glad the discussion got started because that was kind of my idea, is that it would be open discussion and dialogue on this, because it is very personal to everyone, and everybody, even though we are affected individually, everybody has been affected by this in their own way. So we can definitely go around the room, do a checkout, how everybody's doing. So if you want to do it Unity style in YOU, we would always do 3 questions. A really silly one. Do you have anything to add? And how are you feeling, I guess? So why don't we go with, what's your favorite animal? Do you have anything to add, and how are you feeling? And we can start on the Zoom. And Mom, you're first.
I'm Mom, in case you didn't know. Um, my favorite animal would have to be a horse. It has been the peacekeeper, mental, emotional health keeper of my life since I was like 6 years old. So that's definitely my favorite animal. The thing that I would add, I think, and I know it's difficult because we want Western medicine to have the answers, is to tune into your body and see what your body is asking for in not only self-care, mentally, emotionally, but physically as well. I definitely took more vitamins for this whole period of time, and probably I'm not going to back off of that a whole lot. I'm going to make sure that my immunity is as strong as it can be, and I can do the things that my body feels supportive. I do salt baths when I feel like I'm tense, when I feel like I need some toxics removed from my system. But I think we all have more ability to stay healthy than we're tapping into, or that we've been encouraged to tap into. That was something I was disappointed in the medical community about, was that we should have from the very beginning been saying, boost your immunity, take care of yourself, get out in the sunshine when you can, take your vitamins, do your, and I know that some people did. But a lot of people, it just didn't occur to them. They were so fearful or so alone or so taken aback, shocked by what was happening, that wasn't something that occurred to them to do. What was my other question? How am I feeling? I feel great.
Michelle?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to you, Casey, and Reverend Sharon for having this opportunity to have this discussion. And I guess, well, okay, going back to YOU style, I feel, see on my screen, I'm sitting between Casey and Danielle. And so I feel like I should say that a horse is my favorite animal, but it's not, it's a dog. I really don't, I think we've had a good discussion, and I really think, Danielle, you brought up some good points about health, looking to your own immune system and knowing what things you need to boost your own immune system. So I really don't have anything to add to that. And I'm feeling grateful. I'm feeling very grateful that we had this opportunity to have a conversation. Thank you for making the space.
Wonderful. Ken?
My favorite animal would be dogs. I home rescued a dog about a year ago, and then I adopted a second dog about a month ago. So that's my perspective on my favorite animal. People should do what they're comfortable that works for them, and not cut down to group or peer pressure. And I've done my due diligence as it relates to COVID, so I'm glad that I have not caught COVID, knock on wood, at all. And I'm going to continue to do, what's best for me, so I don't. And I thank you for the discussion.
Reverend Sharon?
My favorite animal right now is very specific. It's an 8-week-old Bernese Mountain Dog puppy that's going to come home a week from tomorrow, Corey. Takeaways. I still feel like I'm walking on thin ice, not knowing. And I think especially with my daughter coming over, and she is especially nervous about the plane flight from Los Angeles to Michigan. Now that they've lifted the mask mandate, she'll wear her mask. And she's an epidemiologist, so she's been right on top of this pandemic, for a long time. So still, I just keep looking for my way on this. And none of it, I can't get my head around that none of us have the right answer, the perfect answer, that we're all kind of just wandering.
We're flying by the seat of our pants.
Yep. And if we could give everybody else permission to not be right, maybe it would help solve all this, bipolarism of our society. So I'm anxious to see how this is going to work out.
Elisa?
Yes, thank you so much for this time together and your presentation. My favorite animal, I would say, is a dog. Growing up with dogs, love dogs. And I am feeling grateful for the time together today.
Pamela? Do we know if she's, it doesn't look like she's muted.
She's not muted. Maybe we were getting some sound things from her before, some of the echoing, but maybe if you put something in the chat, Pamela.
We can circle back if she wants, if you want to put something in the chat, Pamela, I can read it out for you. So we'll go on to Stacy.
My favorite animal is cat. And I guess what's been the hardest for me with this pandemic has been, one, living alone, and then the splits that it kind of exasperated within my family,
Mm.
not only along political lines, but along religious lines. So we're all doing our best just to get through it. And it's been a good discussion, things to think about. I have to try to keep an open mind that my way is not the right way. You know.
It's the right way for you.
Right, my sisters, you know, they believe what they believe, I believe what I believe, and there has to be middle ground.
Mhm.
So just try to approach everything from a framework of love.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful that things are getting back to some normalcy.
Yes.
I have a hard time choosing my favorite animal, but I guess one of my animals that I relate to is a turtle because they move at their own pace. And that would be me. And I like the idea that they seem so efficient carrying it around their house with them. So, anyway, I think one of the biggest struggles too for our family is how everything, more of it with the extended family. My immediate family, we're all pretty much on the same page, but the extended family also is quite broken up and you know. Anyway, that's just been interesting, I guess. Not surprising, but anyway, overall, I feel like I'm doing okay.
Good.
And grateful, hopeful. I'm still hopeful.
Pamela didn't put anything in the chat, so I will go on, I guess. First, I'm going to answer with, in case you didn't know, Kent's favorite animal is our dog Maverick. He is really funny, and it's about the only thing that he truly giggles at. So that's his favorite. My favorite is, like my mom, my horses, and very similar to that, they are my emotional, mental outlet, stability, and they have been ever since I was born. So they're my favorite, and I don't really have anything to add except thank you for everyone for participating and making this discussion happen. And I feel grateful as well just to be here and getting to continue making wrong choices. Pamela left and joined again. Pamela, did you want to do the checkout questions?
She has it back.
I don't want to leave her out. All right, well, I suppose unless anyone else has anything to add, we will call this closing.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate.